Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. This is Brad Ward, the Director of Community Philanthropy here at the Council on Foundations. Thanks for joining us. We've got a lot of information to tackle today, so we're going to go ahead and jump right in. I want to thank our partners, Broadband USA, for their help in putting together the webinar that you have here today. Just a reminder that within the webinar, you can find some handouts that are available for you to download. There are 3 handouts that have been uploaded within the webinar, so you can download those at any time. And our speakers are going to be addressing lots of other great resources for you to consider. Wanted to just quickly mention, we've got an esteemed group of folks that have joined us today. First and foremost, Karen Hansen. She's our partner. She's our liaison at the U.S. Department of Commerce in the Partnerships and Interagency Affairs for Broadband USA and the NTIA, and we want to thank her for also bringing with her Leon Wilson, who's the Chief Digital Innovation and CIO at the Cleveland Foundation, and Bernadine Jocelyn, the Blandon Foundation. She's the Director of Public Policy and Engagement. Each of them brings a great subset of experiences working within the foundations on this issue of broadband. Today's agenda, we're going to start out with Karen, who's going to give us a bit of an introduction and give you the scope of resources that are there available to you. And then we're going to hear some firsthand experiences from the Cleveland Foundation working through this issue of broadband in their community, as well as the work that Blandon Foundation has experienced with broadband. There's going to be several resources, lots of opportunities to consider your next steps and the free resources that you can take advantage of. And when we talk about open discussion, that's going to be an open discussion with those panelists. You'll be able to ask questions at any time. We're going to go ahead to the next screen and show you that with the housekeeping, at any point you can insert a question to the presenters. That's found on the right-hand side within the attendees box. You'll find the questions. I'll be monitoring that, and I'll be sure to feed that back to the participants at the appropriate time, and we'll do our best to try to answer everyone's questions. If we don't get to all of them, we certainly will follow up with you on an individual basis, and I can say that all of them, Leon, Bernadine, and Karen, are here to help you even after this particular webinar. So with that, we're going to jump right in to a poll experience, just so that we can gauge your all's participation and knowledge. So you have the opportunity to take a moment and answer this question for us. What is your familiarity with the topic of broadband? And please select one that works well for you, and then we'll take a look at those results. So there you go. You see the results. We have about 30% of the group that's finding themselves in the beginners or moderate category. They're somewhat up to speed on the topic, so that's great. And for those of you who are deeply involved, you're going to find this to be very beneficial to see what's out there from Broadband USA, as well as the personal experiences. And it looks like we didn't have anybody ask what broadband is, so that's a positive. So we're going to move right on to the next poll question. Please answer this as best to your knowledge. In the communities you work with, which priorities could benefit from improved broadband connectivity and digital inclusion? I'll give you a moment to pick the one that's right for you. In the communities you work with, most of you indicated that education and workforce development are the key areas, if not all of the above. So we're glad to hear that. I think you'll agree that as you listen to the presentation, the broadband has connectivity to all of these issues, but for some of us, it's going to be key components for more than others. So with that, I appreciate your help. That gives us a little bit of a sense of where people are on the call. I'm going to turn it over at this point to Karen to get us kicked off for today's conversation. Karen, thank you so much for being with us, and I will let you take it from here.
Thank you so much, Brad, and thank you to the Council on Foundations for hosting this webinar today. We're really excited to have this opportunity to collaborate with you and to share information about resources that are available for communities. I'm also really thrilled that Bernadine and Leon were able to join us. They are true champions in this field, and I think they'll bring a great perspective to this discussion as well. So NTIA, for those of you who may not know, is an agency within the Department of Commerce that provides guidance on telecommunications policy. Our agency was responsible for administering a $4 billion grant program that funded broadband planning, adoption, and infrastructure projects. That program built and expanded broadband networks across the country. It funded state and local planning and digital inclusion efforts, and it's really provided the foundation for our work today as the Broadband USA program. So despite the investments that have been made by governments at multiple levels and the private sector, there are still some very significant gaps in broadband deployment and adoption across the country. These gaps make it difficult, if not impossible, for full participation in today's increasingly digital society. So while the title of our webinar asks the question of how essential is broadband, it's really more and more accepted that it is an absolutely vital infrastructure that affects virtually every part of a community, as well as the opportunities for success for a community's residents. So I was really pleased to see the overwhelming majority of you recognize that broadband is really vital to all types of priorities in a community. And frankly, just having the access to broadband and the skills to leverage it are essential. But as these data points illustrate, and as I think all of you have already acknowledged, it's not just about broadband, it's really about what broadband enables an individual and a community to do. So if it's so important, why do these gaps still exist? So each community we found really has unique circumstances, assets, and needs. Some communities are farther down the road than others. In our work, we found that there are some typical challenges, for example, getting a complete picture of a community's needs, identifying stakeholders from within all the institutions that are affected, understanding funding options, and bringing partners together to begin identifying possible solutions. And because of that, there really isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. To address these challenges, our program takes a three-pronged approach. We educate by sharing lessons learned, models, and best practices. We convene stakeholders to hold discussions that are necessary to begin developing those options. And we assist by providing direct technical assistance and guidance throughout the various stages of what we call a community's broadband roadmap. As part of our mission to educate, we publish resources including guides related to broadband planning, stakeholder engagement, federal funding options, and infographics that help describe the benefits of connected communities. We also develop tools to leverage data produced by the U.S. Census and others to help communities understand where they stand and how to improve their community's connectivity and digital inclusion in a comprehensive, holistic way. We convene stakeholders through in-person workshops across the country, in some cases collaborating with foundations like the Blandin Foundation to help pull the event together and bring communities to the table. The regional workshops bring elected officials, providers, and advocates together to hear from each other and collaborate. Our team also delivers training sessions at events hosted by others, including workshops, regional meetings, and conferences. We produce a monthly newsletter with information about all of our events and other resources, and we'll have information for you at the end to help you learn how to sign up for that. So one of the reasons we're really excited to be collaborating with the Council on Foundations is to have their help to spread the word about our technical assistance services, which are free to communities. Our team, which has had great experience in the past with broadband infrastructure and digital inclusion, works directly with communities depending on their needs. This map shows you where we've provided what we call one-to-one digital inclusion and infrastructure technical assistance since we began our program. We'll often hear directly from elected officials or city or county managers or other types of leaders in communities who might be working on economic development or education or other priorities. We're open and eager for more referrals and have a few options for how we can receive those requests that I'll share later on. So depending on the nature of the request, our technical assistance team works with the community to understand their situation and uncover various options that might be available to them. That might involve bringing examples to their attention from other communities that have encountered similar issues, or in some cases, making introductions to potential collaborators. And given our role within the federal government, we've also facilitated introductions to other federal agencies that might have jurisdiction over a particular issue or which might have funding available. In one example of our technical assistance, in Kansas, we helped 3 counties develop a regional broadband strategy. We shared data with them about the value of broadband to agricultural practices to help them build the case for broadband on an economic development basis. In Louisiana, we helped a city develop their digital inclusion strategy by sharing data sources with them and introducing them to peers in other cities who could help them learn from their experiences. So foundations have provided tremendous leadership in this area, and you'll be hearing next from 2 such leaders who will go into greater detail about what they're doing in Cleveland and Minnesota. So I'm going to let them tell their stories in their own words. But this is a chart that we pulled together, and it's not an exhaustive list by any means, but it gives you some examples of how foundations have provided support for broadband planning, infrastructure, and digital inclusion. There are also some additional examples and resources in the handouts section that Brad mentioned at the outset. So funders like the Benton Foundation have supported convenings and research to educate and raise awareness of the importance of digital inclusion and various outcomes that have been observed through those programs. The Robert Deutsch Foundation worked with the Media Democracy Fund, the Rabin Group, and the City of Baltimore to conduct an assessment of the state of digital access. And we were also pleased to co-host a stakeholder convening with them as well. The Gates Foundation and others helped launch the Schools, Health, and Libraries Broadband Coalition, which is an organization that brings together representatives from community anchor institutions to learn from each other and advocate for policies that support better broadband capacity. And to highlight just a few more examples, in 2010 in North Carolina, the Golden Leaf Foundation provided $24 million in match funding for the broadband grant program that I mentioned earlier that NTIA administered. They wanted to support the efforts of a statewide grantee called MCNC to build fiber networks to expand broadband capacity in rural communities to benefit schools, community colleges, and hospitals. So beyond that initial support for the infrastructure grant, which was certainly a significant investment, they've continued to support local school districts to make sure they're prepared to use the expanded broadband capacity. For example, they funded devices and professional development in public schools, and they're supporting STEM initiatives as well. Another example comes from Smart Chicago, an innovative collaboration between the Chicago Community Trust, the MacArthur Foundation, and the City of Chicago. Connect Chicago is a component of Smart Chicago, and they promote training and other digital equity initiatives with trusted community partners, including the Chicago Library, the Local Initiative Support Corporation, which also had received a grant through our program, and others. The images you're seeing here were taken at a community technology forum, which was a workshop intended to bring the community together to identify their digital equity needs, assets, and ideas for the future. Finally, the example I want to share comes from Nashville. In 2015, the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee served as an asset aggregator and worked with the city government and other community partners, private companies, and funders to launch a $400,000 digital inclusion fund. In their announcement, the foundation shared that making access more affordable and available for our community's citizens is a fundamental tool in the fight to break the cycle of poverty. This fund provided support to integrate digital literacy practices into the programs of local nonprofits like the 18th Avenue Family Enrichment Center, which offers early childhood education programs. And it also supported the Metro Housing and Development Agency's participation in Connect Home, a program that was originally launched by the Department of Housing and Urban Development a couple years ago, which is also supported by a national nonprofit called Everyone On, which provides training, advice, and other support to the members of that program. As you can see from this picture and from what we've found in our experience, a key barrier to broadband adoption can be the lack of affordable devices. So the Digital Inclusion Fund provided tablets in this picture for obviously children, but also it's provided tablets for low-income seniors and free access to broadband subscriptions. So those examples highlight just a few ways that funders have contributed to tackling some of the barriers to broadband access and adoption. And now we're going to hear from two funders, Leon Wilson and Bernadine Jocelyn, who are deeply involved and committed to these causes. So Leon, I'll hand over the floor to you.
Great. Thank you, Karen. And I'm going to go ahead and forward my slides. So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining the conference. As Brad mentioned, my name is Leon Wilson. I'm the Chief of Digital Innovation and Chief Information Officer at the Cleveland Foundation. And what I'd just like to share with the rest, with the audience and people that are on this webinar is just basically reiterating what Karen said as far as the importance and relevance of community foundations being engaged and participating very intentionally in this particular space. And we at the Cleveland Foundation are actually really on the cusp of getting far, far more involved in this particular space in supporting our social mission with what we now call our Digital Excellence Initiative and so forth. And I'll definitely go into that in a little bit more detail later. But what I really want to spend some time talking about, because I do a lot of talks like this, and typically I have 100 slides to talk about the importance and relevance, but for the sake and for the purpose of this session, I really wanted to tone it down and just really hit at the heart of why is this relevant, why is this germane to a community foundation if that is the primary audience. There may be other types of foundations, whether it's private family foundations or corporate foundations that are on this call. And I think this all can be, is all relevant and related to you all as well. But from a community foundation standpoint, which is who we are, we've always talked about the fact that whatever we're trying to do, we're trying to improve the quality of life of residents in our grant-making area. And if you look at that from the community foundation standpoint, you can say that we focus on improving youth services, health and human services. We fund things in arts. We fund things in education, neighborhood revitalizations, especially if you're an urban community foundation. A lot of us kind of have a similar core group of focus funding areas that we primarily focus on. So how does this relate to that? How are we not going against the grain if we're now saying that we want to be involved in supporting broadband and connectivity in our particular communities and so forth? And what I would argue and what I've been basically advocating for in my own foundation and to my board is that it is basically parallel to what we're already doing. And I stole this slide or borrowed this slide from a digital inclusion fellow that I came across because I think it really tied in eloquently that no matter what you're trying to fight, no matter what you're trying to improve pertaining to your particular focus area, so typically we're all about our communities. And if you're fighting for your community, then digital inclusion is part of your fight. In order to be included, you need to be connected. That's it. It is the nucleus of it all. So that's how I like to frame the conversation and why this should be given consideration to any particular community foundation, no matter how large or how small you are. And I believe Karen in one of her slides where she said, where they did polling about how different foundations have gotten involved, whether it's awareness and education, planning and coalition building, supporting digital inclusion programs, or policy and public policy development. There's a space, there's a lane for us to participate in that we already are participating in as community foundations. But when we talk about digital inclusion, when we talk about broadband, and apologize, I got the slides going a little bit too fast right now. Here we go. It's all about that the digital divide still exists, and I think that's part of the mistake that a lot of people make, and even I've talked to a lot of public policy officials that would assume or have this perception that, well, we've been talking about this digital divide issue since the 80s, if not since the 80s. And we put a lot of funding in that. I see a lot of individuals running around with smartphones and all that sort of stuff. We're connected, so the digital divide, is that really still an issue? And a lot of us that operate in the space any amount of time would argue that if nothing else, it's gotten greater, it's gotten wider, and it's gotten deeper. And being connected to the internet has become as essential as public transit is for social and economic mobility. I would argue that being connected and having a robust broadband network in your respective community it basically ties into social and economic mobility for the individuals that you're trying to serve. And what we're seeing going on across, especially in a lot of rural communities and especially in a lot of urban communities, is that we're starting to have this two-tier effect of some form of internet connectivity, but is it enough broadband, is it enough bandwidth of internet connectivity so that individuals and residents can be fully participatory in this digital economy in all aspects of their lives and everything that they do day in and day out. Why do we believe in this, and why do we articulate this, and how do I go about articulating this to board members or to people in the private sector or others in the public sectors? It's all about, and using more business language or ROI language, I say if what we're trying to do is improve people's employability. We want more of our residents to be employable because we understand that most jobs these days require a certain amount of digital skills. If we're trying to increase educational opportunities, not only for our kids in K-12, but also people that are coming out of correctional facilities, returning vets, displaced workers, and so forth, digital literacy, connectivity so that you can check on jobs, you can be fully engaged, is so important as we're watching the digitalization of classrooms and so forth and our society as a whole. If we're trying to improve our area's economic competitiveness, the more connected a community, there are studies that are showing that there's a strong correlation to business growth and population growth. And as well, I just recently was hearing about that they're now trying to identify that a more connected neighborhood, a more connected community translate into improving the value of houses and homes and so forth. So when you're in an urban area with a lot of decay, a lot of blight and so forth, and mayors and county officials are trying to improve different inner city neighborhoods, now we can start showing data, now we can start showing studies, so forth, to demonstrate that it's not just about throwing up new homes. It's not just about mixed-use occupations and so forth of that nature, that if we're not tackling the broadband connectivity within those respective neighborhoods and so forth, then we're basically leaving almost money on the table. We're missing opportunities to make sure that that neighborhood can truly grow and truly prosper, and more residents, more businesses will want to move or locate in that prospective community. And then finally, again, it's about enhancing the overall digital quality of life of residents and their full engagement in this community, in this society. I mean, we're in it as we're watching everything happen around us. The interconnectivity of always being on the internet, participating in the internet. It's no longer about firing up a computer, firing up a browser, and going to the internet. The internet is all amongst us. So how are we ensuring that how our residents, how our communities interact in their day and lives, both in work and in living and everything that they do for health care, for education, for job placements, and engaging with their municipalities and so forth. Lack of broadband, lack of quality, affordable broadband for everyone, you're going to not get the kind of growth that you want, that we all are striving to. So from a community foundation standpoint, what we're now challenged with is that if we're not investing in this, if in some particular aspect, then we're inhibiting our investments. That for every dollar that we're pouring into our communities, maybe we're only going to get 80 cents of that back because we're not tackling the infrastructural aspects of this. So in Cleveland, we have this very hard. I mean, there's been studies and all sorts of reports that show that Cleveland is one of the what they would call least connected communities or cities across the country based on certain dynamics, if you will. Obviously, there's a direct correlation to poverty and poverty concentration in the cities and lack thereof. A lot of that has to do with the carriers and providers and where they're investing in infrastructure and where they aren't. But as we know, what that means is that we have residents, especially in some of our more lower income neighborhoods or neighborhoods that have experienced serious disinvestment in their communities, that those residents are being left behind, and those are the residents that can't afford an $80 a month internet connection bill so that they can have the adequate internet access without any kind of data caps, without any kind of other kind of restrictions on it, so that their kids can do their homework, so that parents can still look for jobs, or if they're trying to upskill, they can take online courses at night, and everybody isn't worried about how much bandwidth one family member is using versus the other. Those are the real meat and bones. That's where it's really hitting hard, and what we at the Cleveland Foundation and what I'm trying to advocate and really share with all my other sister organizations across the country, community foundations and others, is that we're asking our residents to be more engaged, to upskill themselves, to be ready for the jobs of today and the jobs of the future, for kids to go off to college or some other post K through 12 type of education. But if we're not looking at this particular issue as well, then they're not going to be able to move, or we're not going to get the kind of impact that we can expect to get. That we need to help them in this particular area as well. Otherwise, we got them operating with one hand tied behind their backs. In Cleveland, we had an example, and this is just a recent pilot, but we're really excited to collect a lot of the experiential learning, life experiences, stories, and so forth that are going on. This right here is a property. It's a senior housing high-rise with our Metro Housing Authority. It's called the Cedar Kitchen High-Rise. And this is an example of some of the work that we're trying to do and we're supporting here in Cleveland. By no means is this just fully funded by the Cleveland Foundation, but it's something that we're definitely is on our radar, and we're trying to see how can we help scale this across all of greater Cleveland. And what this is it was a high-rise, part of the Housing Authority, where residents pretty much had limited options for internet connections. We were able to work with a couple of different local providers and also some nonprofits that were active in this broadband site to bring high-speed broadband internet to that particular high-rise of seniors. And this is just some of the, through fixed wireless connections, tapping into a fiber backbone of a provider that allowed us to do so, and then beam that fiber to that particular unit, and then bring that fiber down and then turn it into where we then started connecting all the individual 182 housing units or apartments in that particular high rise. The kinds of speeds now that those residents are getting for almost next to nothing. I mean, they might be paying a nominal fee, but now you're talking about if they're wired in and they're plugged in that housing unit, they're getting almost a gigabyte of internet speed, uncapped, unrestricted, full access to be fully engaged for a small family or for a small apartment. If they're on Wi-Fi in that same unit or even in the hallways, they're still getting pretty decent speed. 20 megabytes. I mean, in my apartment back in Cleveland, that's what I'm paying for Wi-Fi, and I'm paying probably $60 or $70 for that. They're getting this, and for them to not have to spend those extra dollars to get this kind of performance, they're able to reposition those dollars for food, for other care, for clothing, for other kind of services, gas to get to jobs and get to work. These are the things that we're trying to tackle. So I always use the example that providing broadband connection affordably into homes and into neighborhoods is no different than public transit of the latter years. and how everyone couldn't afford a car. So we had to make sure from a social and economic mobility standpoint that we provide public transit at an affordable rate. That's the kind of fight, that's the kind of argument that we need to be pushing in our respective communities. So that's just an example of what we're trying to do in Cleveland. There's a host of other ways that we at the Cleveland Foundation are trying to support this, whether it's, and I'm heavily involved in awareness and education campaigns, both at the city and county level. We're involved in planning and coalition building. That's what I'm doing right now. We obviously are now actively engaged in supporting any kind of digital inclusion programs. Infrastructure, obviously, that's something where we might just bring our convening power. We may not be able to pour in $10, $15 million to lay fiber across all of Cleveland. But can we bring the right partners? Can we bring the right providers together and challenge them to do just that and try to get and support some federal funding to make that happen? We can definitely play a leadership role in that capacity. So I'm more than happy to answer any questions that anyone has or talk about other things that we're trying to do in Cleveland. But with that, then I'll go ahead and turn it over to our next presenter.
Thank you very much, Leon. Thank you, Brad and Karen, and hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. I'm going to share some perspectives from Blandin Foundation. Blandin Foundation is based in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. We're Minnesota's largest rural-based philanthropy. We invest about $20 million a year in Minnesota's rural communities. So although we're not a community foundation like many of you, we are place-based. And what makes us a little bit unique in the foundation world is that in addition to the grant making that defines foundations, we also invest in community leadership development, and I run the public policy and engagement program here at the foundation that works to ensure that rural perspectives and needs are well represented in public discourse that impacts rural and help rural leaders get access to the resources and best practices that they need. So as a place-based, rural-focused foundation, our mission is all about strengthening rural Minnesota communities. And just to kind of pile on to what Leon said so eloquently, we're in this space of broadband work because we have realized, as Leon so eloquently explained, that everything that we care about as a place-based foundation is better with broadband. I like to say everything's better with better broadband. So the other thing that compels our, as a rural-based and rural-focused foundation, work and investment in addressing this troubling rural-urban gap is this data point that Karen mentioned, and that we really see a really glaring inequity in the access of tribal and rural people compared to urban Minnesotans, or compared to urban Americans, and are just committed to ensuring that rural people in rural places have the digital resources that they need to survive and thrive. We heard from Leon about Jamie Littlefield, the NTN fellow, and his reasons to support broadband. And the guy that I always turn to and have been inspired by, this is, I forgot his first name, Leon Ubi, is it Leon also? Ubi Gnaeus is a former chairman of Ford Foundation. And he really, several years ago now, laid down the gauntlet and called out the criticality of engagement in this space for the future of our democracy and of our philanthropic missions. That it's just an imperative for democratic participation, economic opportunity, and human expression. And so in brief, that he argues that every foundation risks ignoring a substantial underclass if they fail to include universal high-speed and web access as a core objective. And Karen and I and Leon and Brad and all of us, I think our pretty clear objective and hope from the webinar today is that we can interest and entice, engage, inspire others of you in our philanthropic community to get on board with understanding how important this work is for everything that we do as a sector. You saw this slide from Karen, and I just loved it, so I've included it here as well, because I think it does a great job of reminding all of us in philanthropy and foundations that we've got a lot of tools and roles to play in helping communities change. After all, like government, philanthropy is part of the same public sector, and in that, as a sector, we really do have a unique set of tools that are not available to industry or commerce. So, for example, this education role, at Broadband Foundation, we have invested over the last decade in providing a whole host of educational resources, including webinars, not unlike this one. We have a listserv and a blog called Not About Broadband blog, which I commend to you. We also, as educators, try to bring promising practices to bear through our convening function, where we convene at the state level, at the community level, and at the regional level, champions and other people interested in the topic, with a special focus in our state on co-ops as a real opportunity to advance broadband access and adoption, especially in very rural places. And on the assist part here at the base of the triangle, of course, foundations are uniquely positioned to invest in communities through grants, but also to provide technical assistance and staff support and facilitation support of all kinds. And so I just really wanted to underscore the idea that there are lots of ways that foundations and community foundations in particular, with their place-based lens, are really uniquely positioned to help communities name and claim their broadband-enabled future. The approach that we use here at Broadband Foundation is a real holistic one. It's a whole community approach, and this allows us to apply all of those three roles in our community engagement-rich work. We take the community as the unit of impact, the whole community, as opposed to a lot of efforts that you see that are just sector supported, you know, for the healthcare sector or the education sector. You got that slide, the poll at the beginning of the webinar today asked about kind of by sectors, and many of you participating in the call recognize that broadband makes everything better. And so from our experience, bringing this conceptual tool or mental model to communities is super helpful to help them see how integrated and connected, pardon the pun, all of this work is. So we bring this model to communities. Again, we work in the whole community, not just by sector. And we begin in the community by identifying a local steering committee and really work with the community to make sure that that steering committee looks like the community itself, so that a diverse range of perspectives and experience is represented in the community's goal-setting exercise, which we then lead them through kind of a visioning exercise. Where are we at as a community in terms of the broadband-enabled life and economy we want to see, and where does our community want to be in the future? And then we go through a sort of an ideation or brainstorming session and with the community, given where you're at and where you want to be, what's the path to getting there? And that is a project development phase where people generate ideas and projects to help address their specific goals that they may have identified. In some communities, a knowledge workforce is a higher priority, and some it's digital equity, and some it's the broadband infrastructure itself. And so we provide them the technical assistance, the staff support, and the facilitation to take their goals and objectives and shape them into actual projects that we then fund in each community, and then wrap around that leadership support and information support to help these rural leaders feel inspired. This work, as we all know, takes a long time. It takes a lot of patience, and you got to stick to it. And so paying attention to helping the community advocates themselves stay supported and resourced is really a unique role that community foundations are uniquely positioned to play. So in the couple, we've worked in over 30 communities now in rural Minnesota, In one of them, a little community of Akeley, Minnesota, one of our participants said, sort of in a testimonial about the experience of going through this whole community effort with Blandin Foundation, she said, "We've turned a corner and become a community that's actually growing and thriving instead of stagnant and dying. Enthusiasm and energy we've generated for this town is phenomenal." Another community partner of ours in Kandiyohi County, Wilmer, Minnesota, said, "Connections have been made through this work that will be sustained into the future." And so I've tried to sum up here in just a few slides I've got left some of the key principles or design principles, if you will, to this secret sauce to get results like this, that communities feel empowered, they feel efficacious, and they feel motivated and understand that their destiny is really in their own hands, especially in rural places. It's those communities that step up and take the responsibility for themselves that are seeing progress. So the first lesson we've learned, if you will, communities know best. And this is, I often say, and those of you who work in rural places can probably relate, if you've seen one rural community, you've seen one rural community. And so it's very important that the work be contextualized to the unique attributes of the place you're in. So involving community members directly in assessing their own needs and articulating their own shared broadband community vision is absolutely critical to sustained engagement over time. Local leadership matters. This is so true that it really depends on helping local people understand that they're responsible. Nobody's out there that's going to come save their butts unless they do it themselves. So we have invested heavily in training community leaders and champions to use participatory facilitation skills, because we find that effective meeting facilitation can make a big difference in keeping folks coming back to the planning and implementation table. When people get up from that community meeting, you want them to feel like their time was well spent, it made a difference, and be hopeful about the outcome. And it's not about broadband. We've heard about this. Karen spoke eloquently at the beginning that it's about what broadband can do for your community. So it's not an end in itself. Broadband is a means to the higher ends of community vitality, improved quality of life that Leon spoke about. And so in our work, we've learned that framing broadband access and adoption efforts in these terms of overall community vitality and quality of life can be a lot more inspiring and more successful than by calling out just the technical infrastructure work itself. High touch outreach really works. We find that effective recruitment strategies for late adopters and people that have heretofore not participated in the digital economy are really community-based. They're hyper-local and high-touch, so and personalized. We find that change follows relationship lines at the speed of trust. And so that real personalization and finding people who know people, that this is a very, very effective way to, especially in rural places, to engage people. And peers make great teachers. Peer-based learning formats that encourage local businesses themselves to share practices among themselves, to share their questions and experiments, are effective, they're low cost, and they're very easily, or can be very easily sustainable as a tool to help build a community's technological savvy. Engage tomorrow's leaders today. So young people are not just future leaders, they can be leaders today. Youth bring energy and sustainability to the work, and they're often eager and ready to serve as trainers, technology mentors, partners in things like community refurbishment projects, and social media mavens to promote their communities. Cross-community communication is key. We find that engaging the local media and using signage and other social online that are effective ways and low-cost ways to spur and sustain excitement for community projects. And let's see if I can go. Can anybody help me out there, Brad, to back up my slides? There we go. You can go on to the next. There we go. Thank you. It's really helpful if in your framing and how you talk about this, you can help communities see and then leverage this connection between technology and the benefits to community life. That those 5 aspects of the intelligent community framework I showed up earlier gives a nice picture of that. You know, you got your workforce, infrastructure, digital literacy, innovation, marketing, and advocacy. These are all mutually interdependent aspects of community vitality. And so again, helping people understand that everything is better with broadband and it touches everything can often raise the comfort level of folks who otherwise feel a little daunted in a highly tech field. Going slow to go fast is this idea that relationships really matter and that you have to have patience. The work takes time. It's important that, well, you know, keep your eye on the big prize, but it's also important to celebrate and identify easy wins along the way, but recognizing that this is long haul work and you need to build and sustain capacity for the long haul. I find in my work in the foundation that money and other resources often follow vision. And then finally, I guess the last reflection I'll leave you with, and I hope we have just a couple minutes here for questions to the group, is that it really isn't about the money. That's what foundations often have, but as we looked at that other slide about the unique attributes and roles for philanthropy, it takes more than money. It takes vision, it takes tenacity, patience, endurance, and most of all, local leadership. And so seeing, as a community foundation, your role in helping and supporting those local leaders is really a high and best use of the assets we have as foundations. Thanks for that. I'll turn it back to you, Brad.
Thank you, Bernadine, and thank you, Leon. Karen, we're gonna jump right back here just to give some folks the opportunity to think about the next steps and the support that they need, what is already available. I think that's the most exciting part for me is the broad sources that exist that are not only available, but they are free and tremendously helpful resources. So I'm going to ask you to go ahead and give us a little bit of a snapshot of that. And then just a reminder, if you do have questions for the presenters, don't hesitate to ask those utilizing the webinar, the GoToWebinar in the question box, and I'll gladly get those filtered out.
Thank you so much, Brad. And before I talk about our next steps, I just wanted to say that Leon and Bernadine, your presentations were both just so fantastic and really making the point about how community foundations play these important roles. One point that I wanted to just emphasize is I think you also are in a position to connect the dots within communities. So sometimes these issues may be popping up in the education sphere or the workforce development sphere, but until you bring all those different sectors together to see how the issue is interconnected, it's hard sometimes to get the right momentum going to truly tackle it. So I just wanted to kind of put that fine point on what you already said so effectively. But so for next steps go, as far as next steps from our perspective, we really have a two-part proposal. The first is for those of you who are listening who feel that your communities could benefit from our direct technical assistance. We really are eager to hear from them and to hear from you. So please share links to our website, to the slides, to share with them, to let them know about the resources that we have available. You can join our mailing list. You can encourage them to join our mailing list. So that's really directed to the community and civic leaders that you work with. And then for the foundation folks specifically on the line, we're really looking forward to continuing to work with COF, with Bernadine and Leon to help grow the field of philanthropy and grow the field of funders who are supporting this kind of work. So we're open to working with any of you who want to learn how to integrate this kind of funding into your existing work. We have more examples to share. We can go into a deeper dive with any of you. And today's webinar we really viewed as an introduction to this topic, but we're happy to do follow-up webinars or one-on-one calls with those of you who are interested in learning more. So to make sure we deliver the right kind of information that you'd like to see, we have one more poll on our end that we'd love to get your perspective on. So if we could run that poll. This is just to get a sense from you, for follow-up webinars, what are the kinds of topics that would be of most interest to you and your communities? So we'll give you a few seconds to vote. And obviously, if you don't see an answer that resonates with you, please feel free to put that in the question box or send a note to Brad or me. So can we see the results? Okay, broadband planning and funding, economic development. That's great. That's really helpful. So we'll take that into consideration for our next steps. And then I think, Brad, there's a poll coming up for you.
Yeah, so we'll go ahead and launch the next one. This is just to get a sense, what role can the Council on Foundations play? We have the vantage point of obviously working with all of you as community foundations, privates, and other partners that are out in the community. But we have these great relationships with these federal agencies, as we do with Karen, and so there's opportunities for us to find ways in which you can all converse about this and build the networks and learn from one another. So this question is simply just asking, how can the Council support greater broadband connectivity and adoption in your communities? And we want to hear your particular thoughts on what is the appropriate approach and the role that the Council might play. So I'll give you a chance to answer that question. 86% of you said all of the above, so that's good. And 14% were looking for published guides. So I think we can certainly work with Broadband USA on the particular capacity to build those published guides, and we can look for ways to convene different workshops, whether it be with the annual conference or other summits where we see these issues rise. I'm going to go ahead and give you one last chance to ask questions as we wrap up within the last 5 to 6 minutes here. I do have one question to get us kicked off, and it's particularly addressed to Bernadine and Leon. I was curious how you convinced the foundation leadership, particularly the board, the governing board, perhaps maybe even the executive leadership, how was it that it was important to invest in digital inclusion? How did you get that point across, that this is a necessary investment on our part? And did you encounter any resistance when you were looking to do so, and how did you overcome that?
Well, this is Leon. I guess I'll go ahead and jump in and I'll let Bernadine chime in. Actually, the way I approached it was kind of like how Bernadine summed it up, where it was less about broadband, but it was more about basically reinforcing the investments that we are already making as a foundation, and realizing and just kind of laying it out that we're not in a 20th century, we're in a 21st century, we're in this digital economy space, and just kind of giving them those life-affecting scenarios about why this is so important, and if we do nothing, what would that mean for our continued investments in grant making. And then as far as resistance, the only concerns that I had from my board members was really about the city and the county leadership, because obviously as a foundation, you really don't lay any fiber, you don't train any individual. So what was the commitment from different organizations? What was the true commitment, the genuine commitment from the city mayor's office or the chief, the county executive? What kind of skin in the game were they going to put into this? Because we're talking about heavy lifting especially when you're talking about infrastructure type of things. We're always happy to get people together and host convenings and bring and weave together partnerships, but they wanted some kind of assurance or at least some kind of vote of confidence that this is also important to the people that we're trying to serve.
Thanks, Leon. It's a really good question. I think, in fact, it's one of the biggest challenges, kind of a trailhead challenge that staff does face, is explaining to governance and board why this work is important. In fact, there's a famous story here at the foundation about when our trustees over a decade ago were first invited to respond to staff suggestion that we stand up a broadband focus. You know, we were beginning with a lot of blank stares and what is broadband? You know, one of the questions we got at the beginning of this webinar. What is it and why should we care? I think the argument that has been most helpful for me with my peers and in the senior leadership team here at the foundation and with our trustees is this idea of how foundational broadband, pardon the pun, is for community vitality, and that this topic is very difficult for communities to organize around, and they need, because it's so technical and because historically it's been seen sort of in a sector by sector lens, and it's very challenging for people to see the whole community and for communities to come together. So that catalytic convening role is one that community foundations and place-based foundations really are uniquely positioned to play. And if not us, who? The sort of the ability to paint the picture about the community itself has to respond on behalf of the community is a role that foundations are really uniquely resourced to play. And so that's been, I think, my most effective talking point with our board.
Real briefly, Leon, from the Community Foundation perspective, I'm curious what kind of reaction you've gotten from the communities in terms of support, particularly maybe donor investment, donor interest. Has it yet percolated the ears of donors?
I'd be happy to answer that. So when I give this conversation, or I have this conversation with, let's say, city council members, it's really easy to sell it to them. Because all I got to say is look at your ward, look at your neighborhood, the residents that you are actually elected to serve. This is the disparity that they're in because they're not able to fully participate in this digital economy. So it's actually, when I'm talking to people that are actually grassroots, walking down the neighborhood blocks, can see for it for themselves and say, yeah, Miss Jenkins did come to me the other day and said that her grandson couldn't do this and couldn't do that. It's not actually a hard sell. Now, helping them with the funding is a whole other conversation, but advocating for them and selling them on the importance of it is really not a tough sell when we're talking about city council members. When you're talking about City Hall, the mayor's office, then you're really fighting with all the other exacerbating issues that are going on in any urban city. The mayor's concerned about shootings and killings and opiate epidemic and all that sort of stuff. And how does that resonate with broadband connectivity? Like, do I really need to think about that right now when I got 40 people that OD'd on fentanyl over the weekend? So you're really challenging them to realize that they need to carve out basically mental capacity, that they just can't focus on basic blocking and tackling while this world is evolving. And if they really want a thriving city, if they really want to bring more businesses to their community, it's really showing them the economic dollars, and then that's when you start getting their attention. So it's a tougher sell with City Hall, but City Council kind of gets it.
That's good. So it comes down to the focus and it comes down to the issues. You know, we're out of time, but if you can do it in 30 seconds, I'd be curious, what's your biggest piece of advice to funders as they consider this kind of support in the local communities? Each of you, if you want to just give it a quick 15, 30 seconds. What's your biggest piece of advice?
Yeah, I would say that to pay attention to helping people understand the adoption piece of this, that it's not really or only about building the infrastructure, because foundations, that's not what we do typically, and we don't have those deep pockets. It's about helping communities use the infrastructure. And so that focus on adoption is what I would advise communities to be mindful of.
And what I would just basically say as far as engagement and bringing in the right thought leaders to help educate your community leaders on how they need to best position this conversation. As city officials, they have a lot of say in legislation when you talk about right-of-way passages and working with the different providers. The more educated they are, the better they can make better decisions from a public policy standpoint to position their city to take advantage of this kind of space.
I would quickly jump in and just say I'd suggest that folks look at what they're already supporting, where their priorities are for funding, and consider how supporting and integrating broadband into that could make their existing priorities even more effective.
The three of you are just too darn bright and creative, and we are so lucky to have you, but what's really great about you is you're so approachable. So I want to remind our participants that it's not just the council. You can reach directly out to Karen and Bernadine and Leon, and they're here to help you think about this and to be a champion of the cause. So to each of you, thank you so much. To all of you who stayed with us for the hour, thank you, and please follow up and keep us in touch with us and let us know how we can keep helping with this very important issue and connect you with all the great resources that exist. So with that, we want to thank you for joining us today on the How Essential is Broadband in Your Community. This is the Council on Foundations. Have a great rest of the day.